Hello and welcome to Transmission. Today's guest is Robert Llewellyn, who is the founder and host of Everything Electric, as well as a former presenter of Scrap Heap Challenge. Perhaps the best way of saying this is that if you're in this space, you'll almost certainly have seen his work. We talk about the upcoming phenomenon that is Zap Heap, how Scrap Heap Challenge came together, and onto energy, we talk about his reflections in the electric vehicle market. Let's jump in. Hello, Robert. Welcome to Transmission.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
And in our sort of time-honoured tradition, I'd like you to begin with introducing yourself and your role in energy markets.
Okay, so I find it very difficult to really introduce myself because I've never had anything that resembles a career, but I have worked for many years in what we now would call traditional television, broadcast television, in both comedy and factual entertainment. Those are the two areas that I specialised in. And I think a key thing for where I am now was for 10 years I made a TV series called Scrap Heap Challenge, a game show, an engineering game show. And that led on to me doing a lot of television about how things work in the broadest spectrum. So how you tin a can of tomatoes, how you cook the tomatoes and get them in a tin and seal the tin, from basic stuff like that to how petrol is and diesel is refined. That stuck with me, that one. We're talking 25 plus years ago. I went to places like Draxby when it was still a coal-burning power plant in Yorkshire, which was an amazing thing to see. So I got into the weirdest places. The London sewer system, one of my favourite places to spend time.
I've seen you do a tour of Norwich Power Station.
Norwich Power Station? Yes, we went there. So all those sort of things. And that kind of sparked a genuine interest in I've just got to one step back. The first time I drove an electric car, I went, well, this is all very well and good, but where does this electricity come from? Then realised that for the previous 40 years, I'd driven petrol cars without once, not for a second, ever thinking, where does this petrol come from? Just wasn't a question in my mind. It was too expensive. That would be the most of my opinion. So that kind of pushed me in that direction. And so what I ended up doing then was making some experimental series on YouTube. The first one was called Carpool, where I gave people a ride in a Prius, as it was then. And about 80% of them were genuine lifts. Person A had to go from here to work. So I'd drive them, but while we were driving, we'd talk. We had cameras in the car and we had conversations. And so, and some famous people and some interesting people. And that was a dangerous thing to say because after that became a sort of thing, some of the famous people I knew didn't want to do it because they say, why don't you get someone interesting? It's difficult. Anyway, that then made me confident enough to try and make effectively a TV series on YouTube, which was named Fully Charged, which was about electric vehicles. But in 2010, so it's 15 years we've been doing it. And in 2010, I think there were 3 or 4 electric cars on the market. There was nowhere to charge them. There was no charging infrastructure of any sort. They were not terribly good, the cars. They didn't have very much range unless you were very rich and you could buy a Tesla Roadster. And even that, there was nowhere to charge it and it didn't go that far. And it was incredibly uncomfortable. So, there wasn't a lot of obvious examples that this was a viable alternative. So the only people who had electric cars then were, you can call them one of two things, early adopters or idiots. And I'm really in the middle of that cusp. But it kind of changed slowly. And I think a key moment for me that really galvanized it was literally one journey. So I had a Nissan Leaf on loan it was a press Nissan Leaf. I've since bought it and I still have it. And I drove from my house where I had solar panels. So I spent hours working out when there was enough solar, which is really hard to do. There was no technology to do this. And I was plugged into a 13 amp domestic socket. So they only used solar. And so it was a sunny day for a couple of days. It took 2 days to fill it. And then I drove to an old friend's house in Dorset, which was a 72-mile drive, which was the absolute brake limit, terrifying limit that the Nissan Leaf could really do. where he had a converted water mill that generated enough power for about 12 houses. So much more power than my little solar array. So I plugged it in there. I got there quite early in the morning, plugged it in there. It was charging all day, but 100% from water going through a water mill, through a turbine. And then I drove home, and I had to drive so slowly home because it was so I nearly ran it. So I did make it. But what happened then was I've done this journey in a modern piece of machinery. It was made in a factory out of materials that were dug out of the ground. That were long list of negatives. But I didn't use any fuel that was imported, refined, transported, pumped and burnt. Not one tiny electron came from that. The electrons came from the sun and they came from rain. And that's never been done before. I was driving in comfort, okay, in terror, because I was in a very limited range vehicle, but I managed to do it. And I thought that is a clue to how things could be. And actually, what's been reassuring in the intervening, I think it's probably 14 years ago I did that, is that it's much easier now and so much more plausible. I've now been to, for instance, big rapid charge hubs in France and Germany, where all the power comes from a solar farm that's next to it, is stored in massive batteries. So guaranteed, this is not connected to the grid. They don't bother with the grid at all. You do that with your petrol car. You need an oil well, an oil refinery, anyway. But that stuff I found very exciting. And that's led on to then all the myriad aspects of the energy industry and how that works, which is about £4 million above my pay grade.
Okay, very good. And I have to bring this in, but someone, when you're on the lift on the way out, did ask you. You said I'm here to record a podcast, and they asked you, well, have you done many podcasts before? And I feel like that was an excellent introduction. So that was a very good moment. I'm going to move us on to Zap Heap.
Oh yes.
So what is Zap Heap?
So this really comes out of a kind of missionary zeal in a way that I hear from people in industry. The CEO of Ford, Jim Farley, is a good example. He says in America we desperately need engineers, we need mechanics, we need people who can fix stuff, who can build stuff, who can maintain stuff, and we don't have them. And that has been a bit of a gripe of mine. Coming out of an arty-farty world of comic performances and theatres, I did a lot of that for many, many years. But I always had a fascination with engineering, and it's kind of in my DNA. My brother is retired now, but he's 3 years older than me and was a automotive engineer, but very specifically in Formula One. So he did really high-end engineering for most of his career, and he's a genius at mending stuff and fixing stuff and more importantly, building things like gearboxes. How'd you do that? Exhaust manifolds, all that sort of stuff is what he did in his working life. But the need for engineers is really important, and that is one thing that I've had the feedback in the 20 years since I did Scrap Heap Challenge. The amount of engineers I've met who said I do this job because I used to watch you on a Sunday evening with my dad, and that's what got me into engineering, and that is people across the board. The most extraordinary. So I've met people in aerospace, people in the defense industry a lot. Yeah. People in automotive. There's lots of people at JLR I've met who said, I'm only here because of Scrap Heap. So that makes you think.
Jaguar Land Rover.
Jaguar Land Rover, sorry, thank you. I've used a 3-letter acronym without explaining it. Gosh, I hate that.
But that is a critical part of being the energy industry. So,
yes. Yeah. But anyway, so then I thought, well, all the time when we made Scrap Heap, we used old petrol engines, they were lying about. There were tons of them, and that was fun. And they made a noise, and they were dangerous, and if you broke down, they were really unreliable. And for probably the last 5 years, I've toyed with the idea of how couldn't we do Scrap Heap again, but with electric motors, batteries, motor controllers, but still make weird machines. Not make other cars, but make weird machines that do interesting things. And that was just a pipe dream until I met a wonderful man called Colin Furze, who has a very successful YouTube channel. and he's bonkers and very energetic and full of ideas. And he has built quite a few of the machines we made on. He grew up watching Scrap Heap, and he's made some of the machines we made on the show. If you think the engineers made it in 10 hours, and it just about worked, a remarkable achievement. He would then build one over, say, 3 months, beautifully engineered, that really worked well. And so that was a great thing to meet him. He was a guest at one of our live events, and he went down a storm, and he was wonderful. And he said we should do Scrap Heap again. And I said, well, I would love to, but let me talk to all the big honcho people who own the format and all the rights and all that stuff, sort of telly nonsense. And don't say anything publicly yet. Well, half an hour later, he posted on his Instagram account, which has, I don't know how many millions of followers, but a lot. We're going to make more Scrap Heap, with a picture of me and him. And him going, ah! You know. So that was awkward. And a lot of phones were ringing in old broadcast TV circles. But we managed to blag it. So we've now made 2 pilots of the Zap Heap, we're calling it. And it is exactly the same format. It's 2 teams. They've got to make stuff out of stuff they find on a scrapyard, but they are all issued with a battery pack that we've had safety tested and electric motors. So they start with that, the equal each team, and then they have to build a machine using those components. So they don't have to find that. And that's the one way we've been able to get around how on earth, we don't want them to find a battery pack in an old Nissan Leaf and rip it out with drop it on their feet. It's kind of a bit more complicated, but the advantage we had for the first episode we made was the 2 teams' jobs, day jobs, are converting existing vehicles to electric. So not just cars, although that is the majority of them. Tractors, small boats, particularly a Dutch team who work in Amsterdam. They're producing big tugboats to pull barges out of the centre of Amsterdam, because no one can drive a diesel boat in Amsterdam, let alone a petrol or diesel car. But they've done amazing. So they're really used to working with batteries, with electronics, with motors and all that. So that it was really different feel. It wasn't as noisy and dirty as Scrap Heap used to be, but what they've made is equally insane.
I mean, that was some of the wonder of it, right? Some of the chaos was the dirt, and I think it's going to still have that, right, with a sort of fresh battery, as it were, and then all of the parts around it then come from
from a genuine scrap, from just a piles of old rubbish. I mean, I say it wasn't as dirty. There wasn't as much oil spilt on the floor.
Okay,
but actually, now thinking about it, it was absolute chaos and madness, and there were sparks going everywhere and welding, and that's sensible.
And look, for we when we do a podcast, we make sure we do lots of research, and this was the best research ever, because I just got to watch old episodes of Scrap Heap Challenge,
right?
And I'm not sure I actually did any work for a couple of hours. We'll edit that out, it was just great to watch it. The chaos, the fun stuff, bursting into flames. You know what I'm going to say to you, which is I'm an engineer, and I grew up watching Scrap Heap Challenge.
Right.
And maybe so. I mean, that's a very good case study. But what I would say is that with Scrap Heap, the chaos, people making stuff, how does stuff work is the kind of critical question that always comes up time and time again with engineers. But the thing that I found the fondest memory of was, and a lot of people always talk about like the soundtrack, but for me, it's the little sketches.
Yes.
Do you remember the little sketches?
Yeah. Oh God, yes.
Where it's like, and somebody says, oh, by the way, we're going to make a plane and it's going to fly from this cliff to this cliff. And then they'll be like, oh, how do you get it? Well, I've got half a bin bag and this oil drum and this giant elastic band we're going to use to fling it off the cliff. And you thought, oh God, how's all that work? And then this lovely little diagram would come up.
Would show you, with little sound effects. Well, we're praying and hoping. The guy that did that has said he would love to. He really enjoyed doing it. We have the budget. We have the same budget that we had for tea and sandwiches on Scrap Heap. So we're doing it on a slightly bit more of a shoestring. But we certainly want to try to do something like that with the new thing. I mean, it's being edited at the moment. We've only just shot it, so it's in its very early days.
And when/where do you think people would be able to see it?
So the 2 things I'm really excited. Well, one, it will be hopefully November. The first episode will go out in early November. But what's equally exciting is that when we used to do it, they build the machines one day, then we'd transport them to the test site, wherever that was, and they test them, and then they blow up or fall to bits or do something. And this time that was just done like on an airfield or in a quarry or somewhere that we could do it safely. But this time we're doing it in front of an audience at our live event, Everything Electric South at Farnborough, on the 11th and 12th October. Yes, I've remembered the dates. And we've got a big arena with raised seating, so it'll be a big sort of show.
Amazing.
And they'll both be quite dramatic tests. I mean, we've got enough, I think, because I was always worried a bit about safety, having seen a lot of mad machines. So there's enough of a gap between the public and the machines to not to worry too much. But that is so thrilling, and we're going to show that audience the build, so they will get to see the actual, what we've done so far,
what you've actually made.
Yeah.
And in a world where those 2 pilot episodes go fantastically well, and there's great appetite for it, and someone comes knocking at your door and says, "Right, would you make a season?" Is that something you'd say? Do you think that's a possibility, or is this very much just like, let's just do 2 episodes and that's a nice self-contained thing?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, the focus for what we're doing now is just on getting those 2 done, which has been, amazingly difficult, but we've done it, which I'm amazed that we've done it. We've had one investor that's basically helped us do it, because there's no way we could have raised the money to do it ourselves. I mean, if you think that it's possible for us to do an episode of Everything Electric for literally a few pounds, because it's me in front of a green screen, or it's Jack with a car that he's already got, and occasionally they're more expensive and we have to spend more money, and there's travel and all that sort of thing. This thing cost a bomb. This thing is like a year's budget. Yeah. for what was the fully charged show and is now Everything Electric. So it's a very different beast. But I think the 2 things are, and this is very much to do with Colin Furze as well, is that working outside what was the TV industry has proven to be really much more fun. Forget everything else. I mean, it's a massive financial challenge to keep up, for us to keep going, but it's much more enjoyable because we don't have to answer to a corporate body, and the corporate bodies are not necessarily horrible. They can be really nice and supportive. Certainly, my experience with Scrap Heap was incredible support from Channel 4 and all the commissioning editors. That wasn't bad, but it still had to fit into a certain formula for them, and we don't have to do that. And we get bigger audiences. That's the restricting thing, is that our audience is global. For Everything Electric, about 29% of our audience is in the UK, which I'm staggered at. So it's a big lot in North America, Australia, New Zealand, then the rest of the world. Germany is about our 5th biggest audience. So that shows how well they all speak English, because we don't do a German version. We should do.
And I've made the assumption, maybe incorrectly, that with Zap Heap you're making a car. Is that true?
We're making wheeled vehicles.
Yes. Okay.
In the broadest possible way you
Very
can
good.
see it.
I don't think you need to say anymore.
No, and I think what's interesting is the transmission of the energy in a motor to the wheels is quite interesting. There's a wide variety of solutions.
Okay, because I think one of the fun things is that if it were to go into a season, so I'm just going to bring up a few episodes of Scrap Heap just to give people an idea of some of the variety that came through, but also some quotes from it, and we'll see where these go.
Right.
So I'm going to call this episode the one where they made planes, which is absolutely as dangerous as it sounds.
Terrifying.
So essentially they had to make a craft, then they tried to sort of pull it along by hand, and then latterly they tried to get a winch to kind of get things to go very quickly. A couple of quotes we had: I was going to pilot it, and then I realized how dangerous it is. He's got more life insurance than I have. That winch looks like it was made on a previous episode. So, as I said, I worked very hard to find it. Was there an extremely hardworking health and safety officer behind the scenes?
It's very,
just like a different time?
I suppose we can reveal now how we managed to wangle that. So we had a wonderful, really experienced health and safety person on the set all the time, who was older than I am now. So he was very retired. He talked about his grandchildren a lot. He was slightly hard of hearing.
Okay.
And there was certainly one occasion I can remember very clearly where the crew and the camera people wanted to have a kind of explosion for the beginning of the show, which we were doing on a scrapyard. I mean, it actually was safe. And they're not stupid. They'd done that stuff before. And one of the people had an explosives license. So there was some explosives involved. And they just said to me, he called him Grandad. That was his call sign on the radio.
Yeah.
Take Grandad away, make him a cup of tea. He took the kids to Whipsnade Zoo last weekend asking them about that, the grandchildren. So I said, yes, no, it's nice at Whipsnade. We had a lovely day. And in the background, I could see this massive explosion because there's a lot of petrol, a lot of gasoline, and some explosives. That it makes a big thing, and that went off. He didn't see a thing. So, but that was, you would not get away with that now. I mean, we're talking 25 years ago when that happened. It would be catastrophic, and I'm sure we wouldn't get insurance. But it was something that actually, to be fair to the production on that show, a huge amount of time was spent about safety. Mm-hmm. Wait a minute, if there's someone sitting in this and it turns over, they're going to get crushed.
Yes.
So we would build, and that was where the health and safety bit was. We would build them a safe cage for a driver to be in a machine that walked on two sticks and had a jet at the back.
It was definitely happening. So, for example, there was an episode where you try and design things that would fling a car, which was, I mean, obviously, what would you do with things you find in a scrap heap? Yeah. You would learn how to fling cars.
To throw cars.
And there's a spectacular thing that someone creates. They create this trebuchet, so it's like a medieval catapult type
siege
thing.
Engine.
Siege engine, thank you. And you can see everyone is stood a long way away from this.
It was extremely
and they pull the pin and the whole thing just collapses in this giant cloud of smoke, which is what a wonderful thing. And the camera pans and it says, if it's a failure, at least it's a proper failure.
Yeah, that was a proper failure. And that was the team, the barley pickers, the farmers from Dorset, where one had a very famous line, which was proper job. We're not going to muck about with this. We're going to do a proper job. And when that thing collapsed, he said, "Now that's a proper job." He was very proud of the way it completely. They were so delighted. You think they'd spent hours of sweat and toil building that, and when it all fell apart, they were all laughing hysterically.
Yeah. We're not going to put that back together today.
No.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
So, final question on Scrap Heap was, and I think people probably always thought this: was it genuine junk? Or was it littered? I mean, if they'd looked long enough, would they have found something that was kind of the perfect tool for the job?
No, probably not. So they were all filmed on real junkyards, real scrap heaps. Really, they really were. And particularly, we made quite a few series in the USA, and we were on a huge car scrapyard in the Valley in Los Angeles that I never saw the far side of. I mean, it covered thousands of acres of piles and piles of old cars and all kinds of junk. But we did have to make sure that, I remember there was an episode we did in the UK where they needed lawnmower engines for the design. And we knew that we had to make sure that there were like 3, I think, working lawnmower engines. But we didn't leave them on a shelf with a label. They were kind of chucked in the junk and sort of partially covered over. So they'd have to search for them. Well, the first thing they came back with was a lawnmower engine we didn't know was in the scrapyard. It was like upside down in a puddle. And they spent about 4 hours. They got it working and they did use it. They wasted so long making this wretched old rusty heap of junk work. That was so classic. So yes, we did have to. It was called seeding. We had to seed the yard. And there were maps that were very secret. I occasionally got a glimpse of them, which showed little red dots where critically important things were. So if it really went to poo and they were looking at it for 5 hours and they needed to build the thing, we go, just over there near the old Morris Minor. Have a look under there. Oh, there's the thing you need. But we in the ones we've just done, this was it's essentially a farm / scrapyard.
Okay.
Where there is an enormous amount of junk, but a lot of it from the electric car industry, attempts at making something that's not worked, and they've dumped it there, and they've got hundreds of forklift trucks that are all piled up. So bizarrely, it's more of an electric scrapyard, not intentionally. That's just what it is, because that stuff is now coming, coming to the end of its life. So because they had the motors and the batteries and the electronics to make that work, but they didn't have any wire, so they had to go and find wire. Well, they were stripping wire. They knew what to look for. They're bright engineers. So they were stripping wire out of things like forklift trucks and hydraulic lifts. They go, oh, that's a good piece of wire. And they were ripping that out. So there is some genuine hunting there.
I think I'm really excited to see someone get excited about the type of wire they've found.
There's a lot of discussion about wire and crimped ends and connectors. You'll love it.
Perfect. This is great. I'm very excited for this. Okay, let's move on from Zap Heap and let's go on to everything electric. So I think a lot of people will know you from Fully Charged, which has just had a rebrand. So why did you make the switch from Fully Charged to everything electric?
I can't now remember the hours of discussions about the title. So the Fully Charged show just came about, someone said fully, I don't even know where that came from. And it sort of made sense. So, okay, when I first started it, I thought Top Gear, really popular, and electric cars don't need gears, so I'll call it gearless. So I think I don't know if it's still up, but there's an episode or two that it's called Gearless. And then someone said Fully Charged, and I went, oh yeah, that's better. I don't really like gearless. And then also, of course, I curse within days of calling it gearless and thinking, that's the title. I drove an electric car with gears. So some of them do have gears. So Fully Charged just made more sense. But then as we then started doing the live events, and we'd call it Fully Charged Live, it was very much the people who knew the YouTube channel would come along, which was fantastic. And there was a lot of them, and it was wonderful. But we really realized quite early that it didn't mean anything if you hadn't seen the show and you didn't know anything about electric cars, but you might be interested in them. And Everything Electric was our sister channel that was more focused on home energy, renewable energy, those sort of things. And that people got it, and everyone we spoke to, well, I know what that's about. It's Everything Electric, it's obvious. And so then we called the live events Everything Electric, and we really noticed an increase of people who'd never seen anything I'd done, never seen that Fully Charged show, didn't know anything about anything else. But because it was called Everything Electric and it was in their city, and you could test drive an electric car and see a company that puts solar panels on roofs and batteries and all that, changed. And so therefore it was a slow process, but we thought the actual title should be, it's just simpler if everything is called Everything Electric.
And it gives you breadth as well. So Fully Charged felt like it was linked to cars. Everything Electric feels like e-bikes, planes, heat pumps, trucks, solar panels. We had the same naming question came up this week in the office, and we were asking, what would you call an evangelist in the battery space? And ambassadors was where we got to.
Ooh.
Yeah. That's too cringeworthy?
Well, it's slightly. I just saw myself with a Christmas cracker paper crown. Going, I've got an idea. What about ambassadors? It's a bit of a dad joke. That's my only worry.
Oh, it's firmly in the dad joke category. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to the EVs. So if you wanted to bust some myths on EVs, where would you start?
I mean, I think the two that are still clinging on I'll have to replace the batteries, and there's nowhere to charge them. So this is from people who've never driven them and don't know anything. And I mean, I think there's two groups of people that are negative. They're the ones that actively hate the idea, and they're, I have to say, generally men. And think that a real car has to have a petrol engine and make a noise. And they're going to be around for the rest of their lives. They're not going to change. And I don't care. It doesn't worry me at all. But there's a lot of other ones that have been really pummeled by negative information in the traditional press, courtesy of the fossil fuel lobby, very effective lobbying group. And in particular cases, more in the United States than here, but I mean, it's leaked here. It's the people who fought against asbestos, smoking. And when I say the people, it's the actual individuals in those lobbying groups that have fought, and they know they're going to lose. That's the clever thing of them. They can delay. So the delay in people stopping smoking was probably 25 years. So in that 25 years, the tobacco companies made billions, and they fought and argued. It's not sure that it's really going to give you cancer. It's not absolutely certain that smoking's bad for you. Secondhand smoke isn't really that bad for you. They would fight and fight. And the one I know about most intimately is the asbestos. I lived with one of the scientists who proved that asbestos wasn't particularly good to breathe and all that stuff. And the fight that the asbestos industry gave back was shocking. I mean, it was including violent threats to his personal safety. I mean, they will fight to the bitter death. And the oil industry, they're under threat. They're a massive, powerful, politically well-connected industry, and they will smash anything that gets in the way of their profits. And they're very successful in America at the moment. So I think it's justifiable to be highly critical of individuals who work in the oil and gas industry, and I know a lot. And they're really nice people, and they're not evil. But I won't forgive them, and I won't give them any quarter. And I go, stop working for them, get a proper job. And then I use a lot of expletives that I won't now. But that fight is effective. So people then say, oh, well, the batteries don't last. I've heard the batteries. They will always say, I've heard. And I said, well, where did you hear that from? I don't know. It was in the papers or someone said it on Facebook. And I said, well, what if I tell you they're literally lying because they want to keep making money out of you buying petrol?
And part of the work you do is to say, well, hold on, look, I mean, you might not be able to get to an EV immediately, but hey, here's a podcast. You can listen to me driving around in an electric vehicle and you can hear how it is, what the experience is like. You could come to a show and you could sit in one of these and you could drive it for yourself, to trust your own eyes, ears,
absolutely.
Your own experiences. Is that one of those, I would kind of call some of the people you've described like hippos. So hippos always move from like the watering hole to the vegetation. They walk the same line every single day and they kind of always do the same thing. I would say that some of those groups that have always driven diesel, always driven petrol, that was going to be the same group. How could you get someone like that to go, oh, actually, I didn't have to swap the battery out halfway through and I wasn't sort of nervously tapping the meter all the way through just to see if I had enough juice left to get there. Actually, it was pretty straightforward. I quite liked it.
I mean, I think the thing is, so the where I think we've had genuine success is in the live events, the test drives we do at the live events. So that is, and we've now done over 120,000. We've facilitated 120,000 live, test drives all over the world, which is, I think, incredible. I couldn't believe it when I was first told the numbers. I think it's gone beyond that now. I think that was a couple of shows ago. But that has had a huge impact. And I've certainly met people who said, oh, I've been driving my, Kia e-Niro for the last 3 years because I first drove one at fully charged live as it was then. So it had an impact. And what that's led to then is, that's countered a lot of that negativity. And what I think also happens, which is nothing to do with us, is a person on a street has an electric car and the neighbour goes, oh my God, you must be terrified that I've just read in the Daily Mail that the battery's either going to burst into flames or you'll have to throw it away in 2 weeks. And then they see them 2 years later and they're still driving it and they go, oh, is it all right? Yeah, it's fine. It's boring. It's just a car.
And we've got some EVs going into sort of 100,000 miles type thing now. So
we've just seen, 100,000 miles. No, I've got EVs that have done, mine Nissan Leaf's done 100,000 miles. No, 97, I think. We've seen a car in China that had done 550,000 miles on one battery.
Wow.
550. But what's important and this is really the truth that is hard to communicate, is the cars that are being made now with batteries now, the battery genuinely, it's not a piece of PR. It will outlast the car. You'll have to rebuild the car. So that the battery the car that battery was in had new drivetrain, new suspension, new seats. It was knackered. It had done 500,000 miles. It was the bodywork was shot to bits. The windscreen wipers, everything else had broken and worn out. Not the motor. The motor will do 1 million miles, because that's the thing about when you tell people about the Nissan Leaf motor, really early electric motor in cars, needs to be serviced and lubricated after 500,000 miles. So they've done nothing to that motor at all. You don't touch it, you don't look at it. It's absolutely fine. It's got one moving part. It's really simple.
It's incredible. From the stationary storage side, which is my background, the sort of, you go back, say 3-4 years, and it was sort of 7,000, 8,000 cycles was sort of full charge discharge was considered to be sort of what
groundbreaking
would be
unrealistic.
Would have been sort of front end. Now that number is 13, 14, 15,000 cycles. So not only have you got older cars being able to do this, but you also, this sort of next generation of batteries coming through are going to be X percent better.
It's what is it, CATL, who we went to visit in China recently, they're talking about the 90-year battery. So it will have a useful life of 90 years. So there might be 45 years in a car and 45 years as static storage, which is, when you see that now being done. So a good example is Redwood Materials, which I mentioned in the USA. They power their very, very big industrial units. It's not a little workshop. Massive factories with enormous energy needs, 100% renewably powered from vast solar farms in the desert, but feeding in huge batteries that are all second-hand car batteries, repurposed into big boxes, and it's not pretty. I think you could easily say this is not a pretty. It's just rows of like big industrial containers and massive fields of solar, but it's in the desert, so
I think we are going to see this in many, many places.
Yeah.
So perhaps not so like in central London, you're not going to see sort of a load of secondhand batteries laying out. But if you're going to any kind of industrial process somewhere where there's space and there's because of cost restrictions, then yes, a second life for sure.
Actually,
makes sense.
very briefly, because it was a few years ago, I've been in an apartment block in Paris that the lifts and all the public lighting are charged from solar on the roof, stored in old Nissan Leaf. No, old Renault Zoe. Pardon, Renault. Old Renault Zoe batteries, and the lift is powered by Renault Zoe batteries. And it was so stupid because I've done all this stuff for years, but when I got in the lift, I was a bit nervous. There's enough. Has it got enough range?
Well, how big was the building?
It was quite tall.
Okay,
unusually,
well,
I was probably 10 floors.
That's a fair question.
Which is in Paris is quite high because they don't do massive. Anyway,
absolutely. Okay.
Sorry.
I'm going to move us on to our final two questions. So, is there anything you'd like to plug?
Oh, well, I mean, I think I would only like to encourage people, if you can, get to our live event. So we're doing a whole lot of new ones next year, and I can't remember anything about them. But the big one we do every year is at Farnborough. I mean, we had over 45,000 people there last year. So they are big events. Amazing talks we get, and amazing panels, which I sometimes think, oh, that's too weird and quirky, and they're packed to the roof. They're funny. I've just got to tell you. So Dan Caesar, who's the CEO of the company, comes out of domestic energy stuff, renewable energy in your home, heat pumps, solar, all that stuff. He did a talk a few years ago called Beyond the Boiler. And at one of our meetings, we were going, well, everybody's going to be queuing up for Beyond the Boiler. They're not going to want to talk to this amazing man that we've got to... Beyond the Boiler, I couldn't get in. I would think there was 4,000 people watching that panel, because it was people who are really at the forefront of heat pump engineering and how you install them and how they work. And people are interested. It's really... So I had to eat my words about it.
So go to the show, but make sure you go there early so you can hear about going beyond boilers, because otherwise you're going to be at the back of the queue.
Be at the back of the
and
queue.
You're going to hear nothing.
And there's also loads of test drives at those things, loads of cars you probably won't have seen. So we know we've got quite a few cars being unveiled there. That's one of the really...
so you can get in them, press buttons, get a feel for how...
Drive them.
Perfect. So important for the groups out there who've kind of only ever seen petrol and kind of, just need to get that hands-on experience. Okay, and then final question, is there a contrarian view that you hold?
Oh, well, I suppose in terms of electric vehicles, is that they're not going to save the world. They're not the answer to all our problems. They create their own set of problems that they'll create new problems that I can't actually envisage yet. But I've just walked right through central London, and what really pleased me was I saw 2 electric bin lorries. Dustbin lorries, we call them, or garbage trucks, and about 10 delivery vans that were electric. I saw thousands of electric cars, but I mean, they're just cars. Why are people driving in London in effectively a medieval city with very narrow streets and very few places to park cars? Just seems a bit bonkers. It's a really easy city to move around in with public transport. The London Underground system, the Elizabeth line, bus services are amazing, and you can ride bikes now much safer than you could when I lived here.
With all of the superhighways that have been put in place.
And when you go to cities that have gone to the next level, so Utrecht in the Netherlands, a very glowing example, car use has dropped to almost nothing. You still can own a car if you live in Utrecht, but you have to pay a lot, and it's a real pain in the ass. But you're much better off using a car share scheme, which they've run, which is brilliant, which is also connected to the grid and does vehicle to grid on a proper big scale. So their city is partly running from all the cars that are parked there. Anyway, but that when you see it, you go, cities would be much better. But I quite like the fact that I'm able to get from outside a city to near a city when it's raining in an electric car.
Absolutely.
What I need then is a car park at the end with slow charging, with destination charging, which is coming. But so I would always argue electric cars aren't the answer, but they're much, much better than the stuff we use now. So if we're near the Euston Road in London, which how long ago? Because I did a TV program just down the road about the air monitoring system outside the university just down the road. And that was when it was catastrophically toxic. that street. It's got much better because of electric transport in London, but it was really bad. It was the scientist described it as a carcinogenic soup. That's what you're breathing in. And the really shocking thing was, I remember pushing my son in a pushchair up that road years ago. He's now 32, so it was a long time ago. And one of the things they did at that monitoring station was put one of the sensors down low at sort of child height. And that was 10 times worse than at our height. So the stuff sinks, all the particulates and everything. And the children are breathing that. And he said that is lethally dangerous, that area. If you breathe that for too long, you're going to die. If you lay down there to sleep, you wouldn't wake up. I mean, it was really shocking. And that was a lot to do with taxis and buses, which were all diesel. That was diesel. So we're shedding diesel in this country, which thankfully, is the most toxic bloody fuel.
So your non-contrarian view is that we need to move off diesel and petrol onto EVs, but your contrarian view is the EVs not necessarily always the best tool for the job.
And also, sometimes, the ownership model, I think we need to challenge. And I think your generation and younger than you are going to challenge that, which is a really big problem for car manufacturers, because it basically means we need about 10% of the cars we've got now. It would, if you're sharing a car, which an electric car is a very easy thing to share, you don't need as many. And if you can be confident, and the only place I've seen this really work well is Utrecht, which I mentioned it, is there were sort of middle-class university graduate people with children who literally decided to sell their car because it was a pain in the arse and use the car sharing because they've got a little Renault Zoe down the corner for the thing. They can use a Tesla to go and see grandma in Amsterdam. They've got this choice and it's so local. They walk 20 meters and they can use a car and it's so easy to use.
They kind of go like multi-transport as well. So they have this kind of rental car. And if you go to somewhere like Amsterdam, you'll see all these parents with the bike's called like an Urban Arrow.
Yes.
And essentially it's just a bike and it's got a big bucket on the front.
And
the idea
of
the bucket is you chuckle your kids in the front
Chuck
and then you
kids
just
and
zoom off. Yeah, exactly. And so coming to London soon, I hope.
Yes.
Well, Robert, that leaves me to tie it all in and say thank you very much. You've been a wonderful guest. It's been a real honour having you on, and very, very, very good luck with Zap Heap.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.